Hello, my name is Carly Haynes, and I'm the Technical Support Specialist for the Office of Distance Learning and Summer Programs. Today's video is going to look at asynchronous online learning activities, how you can use them, why they can be beneficial and important, and what students can get from using these different activities in your online course. Let's look at the definition of asynchronous activities. Asynchronous activities are commonly facilitated by media such as email and discussion boards, supports work relations among learners and with teachers, even when participants cannot be online at the same time. Asynchronous activities can include many different sorts of activities, such as the discussion board, wikis, blogs, many more that we'll discuss later. Asynchronous activities have a few different benefits, but one of the great things about them is the ability for students to really be reflective with their comments and take time to think about how they're going to respond and what they're going to say in their responses to any activities. This promotes a dynamic discussion between students and the material. Without the limitations of having to come to school and the freedom of working in their own restrictive environment of some sort where they feel comfortable, students can complete their work at any time, any place, with the convenience of being able to do it when they feel comfortable and not within a certain confines of being in the classroom or under certain guidelines that they might feel a little more restricted. Since reinforcing ideas might be difficult to do during a weekly class session, the nice thing about asynchronous activities is that it allows the students to really comprehend what they're doing, take the time to review material, and then show their own interpretation through their activity. And the content requested can be sent in a variety of methods, which can be really exhilarating for students depending on the type of learner they are. So instead of just writing out a message on the discussion board, they could speak their message in a voice board. If they feel more comfortable using text or listening, there are options for them to do so. Some tips for increasing engagement in asynchronous activities. There's lots of them, but specifically as taken from the Tips from the Pros, an article in Faculty Focus by Rob Kelly, he suggests making sure that you're very explicit with the rules that you want the students to follow and what you're looking for them. Meaning, if you want students to submit a discussion board post each week, provide them with a number of times they're supposed to check and review the discussion board. You can track attendance that way and see how they're engaging with other students by seeing how many posts they read, how long they're logged into Blackboard or the discussion board. And then also the certain number of responses they might have to respond to another student or students in the class. So they do their own post, but they also might have to respond to 2 or 3 other students' responses. You can help encourage students to engage in fruitful discussion posts with one another, and to do so, you can have students read posts that they liked out loud. So if a student found another student's post really engaging, they could read that aloud, and that creates a really strong sense of environment and comfort for students to know that they're being praised by their peers. In addition, you could make sure you hold students accountable for their work. For instance, have one student a week kind of review the discussion boards and all the different areas that were described and discussed and the comments that were made by the students. This keeps students in charge and on top of their work, making sure that they're responsible for it. In addition, by having students submit their own discussion board questions, it can really create an engaging environment for them where they feel that they're really contributing and offering something from the material, and it also demonstrates what they're learning. Here's a sample question that I used for one of my discussion board posts. Students were asked to create a brief presentation that they would have in class, and then they were supposed to describe a story, provide a story with a certain moral. And so I asked the students to not only describe what storytelling means to them, but also to kind of let me know and to let their peers know what they learned from each other and what stories they liked hearing in class. So this went through an entire week where they could respond to part of it sometime, respond to the second part after they had seen the presentations in class, so on and so forth. And many of the responses that I saw were wonderful, but not only that, students were responding to one another. So if a student responded to someone's post, there would be 6 or 7 responses to one particular post, which really demonstrates to the students that they really liked what the others are saying, and this can create a really strong sense of environment for the students. and make them want to participate. Some additional asynchronous activities besides the discussion board could be voice email. This can be a really great way to personalize your contact with students. If they're doing really well, you can praise them very strongly. You're doing a great job, and they can hear that in your voice. If someone needs a little encouragement or is not doing so well, you can offer that by saying, your work hasn't been as good as I know you can do. If you just try a little harder, or if you ask questions, or if you want to do a weekly session where we meet virtually, I'm happy to do that. And that outreach to students can be really powerful, and it's very direct. The voice board is another opportunity for students to communicate, not just through text, but also by speaking. This could be a great way to do various presentations, but also for the students to get to know one another on a deeper level, so they can hear how one another talks and the different tones and increments within their language. In addition, voice presentation can be another great way for students to interact with one another. Instructor and students can both create small presentations where you guide each other through a website. And during each time, students and instructors can comment on those presentations, which can be really wonderful and creating a really engaging community where students are not only responding to one another's work, but you can also have the instructor guiding them as well and offering critiques, so that it's a really cyclical environment where students are getting a lot and learning from one another. In addition, blogs and wikis are used fairly often, and they can be a great way for students to review one another's work, to add and change assignments, and to really create an environment where they're doing projects together. There's a history button where you can track and see when students came in and when they're making these changes. So it's a really great way to follow along with assignments and see how students are working on their own. In addition, there's the voice podcaster, which you can basically allow students to make their own MP3s that they could download and send along, kind of like their own recording. If they want to talk about a certain topic or if they have a presentation, it could be recorded and available for other students to review and listen to or to learn from. And finally, video recordings. Use the Wimba classroom. Let students go in there on their own and make these various recordings that they can present to one another and download as an MP3 or MP4. In addition, you can create various video recordings that students can watch on their own, and it can be a really great way to supplement material. Instead of keeping them inside the virtual classroom with you, they can watch on their own time and still be learning and engaging with the material. One of the concepts that's really important with asynchronous activity can be spontaneous facilitation. And this really means that you're allowing the students to have the direct overseeing of the conversations that are going on. They can spontaneously create and keep their discussions going without the intervention of having the instructor create a question or mediate the responses. And this can be powerful because spontaneous facilitation is not happenstance, but it occurs and develops over time. And with students knowing that they have the ability to create their own questions, to offer suggestions, and to provide feedback to one another, it can be really powerful for them and help them engage with the material. Some of the perks of spontaneous facilitation could be that instructors can focus on their own work and the actual grading and comprehension of assignments. You can actually see what students are learning by the questions they're asking and by the way they're responding. In addition, it creates a safe environment. As we've seen, the more students feel comfortable to share, the more likely they'll be engaged with the content and willing to kind of go on a ledge, be creative, and express themselves. And it allows students to explain their interpretations or misinterpretations of course material, so you know exactly where you can help them during your class time and with other asynchronous activities that you might provide them in order to help them understand the content. However, some disadvantages could be that there might not be enough volunteering. You never know what type of class you're going to get. So kind of reading through how your class is and how they feel comfortable with the material, you can decide how much spontaneous facilitation or mediation you'll need to have. In addition, this might be additional work for students to have to do. If they're not as creative or if they're not really engaged with the content, this could be considered an extra piece of time that they just don't want to have to do. And that'll all depend on the type of student, and you can read through that slowly as the class progresses. Also, students might just lack competencies to be able to create meaningful questions and responses to one another. And again, that's something that you'll have to read through over time. And finally, only a selected number of students may benefit. If there's not enough volunteering, certain students may be offering a lot of the facilitation over and over again, and this really could only be benefiting them rather than the class at large. So just some things to keep in mind if you should use spontaneous facilitation, though I do recommend that you allow it because, or offer it at times, because it really can be a great way for students to create a community amongst themselves and engage with the content. Just going one step further, Yang, Olisova, and Richardson looked at the cultural implications of some asynchronous activities, specifically with the discussion board. In certain cases, cultural implications can demonstrate that there are going to be different types of interactions with the material and with the assignments. You need to be aware of students' cultural backgrounds because that's going to impact how their work might turn out. Not all the time, but this could be something to keep in mind. In their study, Yang, Olisova, and Richardson found that looking at students that communicated from two different universities, one a European university and others, it was very Asian-centric, the students found that the European students were a lot more creative and expressive, whereas the European students thought the Asian students were a little more reserved and not as creative and offering new ideas because they were just a little bit more shy with the content. So those are things to keep in mind, because if you're providing guidelines and you're modeling discussions so that people can be in tune with the way that they are naturally or culturally, you want to be aware, because you don't want to be grading based on the way that they're expressing themselves necessarily, because there could be cultural biases included in the grading, because if you're really looking for that creativity, it just might not be there with certain students. So some of the benefits to asynchronous learning, again, it's available anytime, anywhere. Students have cell phones, they have PDAs, they have those netbooks and notebooks, iPads, phones with internet, and they can really use all these asynchronous tools anywhere at any time. And this can be great because it allows them to incorporate things that they might see in their daily life or on the go into the classroom and make connections everywhere, which can be really wonderful in helping them to engage with the material. In addition, it can provide multiple cues for learners. We know that all learners may not be auditory or visual learners, and so offering different types of outlets for them through the podcast, the videos, recordings, where they can play it back and rehear and re-see the content can be very powerful for them. And it creates a dynamic connection between the participants and the instructor, meaning the more that they have the availability to communicate with one another, the stronger they'll feel connected to one another and the instructor. And that's important because students want that connection and will enable them to be more engaged with the material. Some things to keep in mind about asynchronous learning, not detriments, but just things to keep in mind, is that students may not form a sense of group or community. And that's something you should be aware of and try and monitor so that you can help them incorporate one another into assignments and into activities. If students aren't responding as you'd like, really try and pick them out and see if you can help them in a way so that they can benefit as much as everyone else is, or those that are really creative or expressive might be. Students might not feel that they have to adopt an active behavior. So if your guidelines are not very strong, saying you have to do a certain number of posts or a certain number of podcasts or review all the content, students are going to get by with what they feel they only need to do. And so you need to make sure that you are promoting an active behavior and really getting them to be participatory. And then when students need to work in groups, there's sometimes a lack of leadership. And so again, once you see how your class is and how these groups interact and who the stronger leaders might be, make sure that in group work you can divide up those leaders into different groups so that the entire class can be benefiting from the people that might be go-getters rather than those that might be a little more shy. So just things to keep in mind in order to help your entire class perform at their best by having all these different activities and working in various formats. So here's just a list of works cited. And these are all available in the suggested readings. Feel free to review them if you have time. They're very helpful and you might learn a lot from them. So thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful in letting you see the wonderful benefits and the vast array of different types of asynchronous activities that are available for your online course.